David, yesterday when we were talking, you just came out with the most outrageous, prejudicial thing about oysters I think I'd ever heard.
Oh, you mean that opinion that I hold along with about 50 million Frenchmen? I think the French not only have the greatest oysters in the world, and when I say that, John, I don't mean they're a little bit better. I mean they're different. I mean, there's nothing like oysters in France. When I eat oysters in the U.S., for me, it's kind of like I'm eating it because it makes me dream of oysters in France. And the whole French culture around oysters is completely superior to our own.
When the Europeans started bringing over oysters from America, there were entire reefs around New York, 200 feet long, nothing but oysters. They brought them over to Europe, and the Frenchmen ate nothing but American. They had their balance, they had their choice at that time. And American oysters just beat the pants off of everything. 90% of all oysters grown in Europe are American oysters.
You're absolutely right. It's the same oyster that we have a lot of on our West Coast.
And that I love.
But in France and in Seattle, in Paris and in Seattle, it tastes like two different oysters. You would not be able to see a similarity between those two oysters. And that's the point. You and I are going to taste, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 different types of oysters today. That's the good part.
Oh, look at this.
But the thing is that...
This is rare.
I thought, as you well know...
Isn't it beautiful?
Which?
Well, we're about to find out which are which. I know we agree on one thing.
What's that?
No red tide, neither of us. If you're going to have an oyster, guys, have the oyster.
Let's start with these East Coast oysters. This guy is from Rhode Island.
Okay.
This is the
That's
Raspberry Point. Now,
I wanted that one.
I want to see whether this is separated from the shell or not. It is. It's cut away from the shell. Now, may I make the point that my... just wait 1 second. My thing about oysters in the U.S. is not just about the oysters themselves, it's about oyster service. In France, they would never, ever cut this away before serving it. They give you a special fork where you can cut it away, because the oyster was alive.
The French must love you for your...
The
It's
oyster,
so simple. Here.
The oyster was...
Don't make me stop.
Wait.
No.
Oh, eat it. Did you know that in France, they don't like to serve them when they're 1 to 2 days old? Because they say...
That's probably what these are, about a day. But I'm sorry.
Okay? No, let me just make my point. They call that the first water. This is how crazy the French are. They think that the first water is inferior in taste. They say by the 2nd to 3rd day, the oyster develops its own water, le deuxième eau, and that's when they like it at 2 to 3 days. Yes. Now, for me, John, the colder the better for oysters. And as you go up the East Coast and you get to a place like Malpec, Prince Edward Island, which has Malpecs, the oysters get better. Now this one, may I point out, this is beginning to have the look that a French oyster has, that transparent kind of congealed seawater look.
The other thing about Prince Edward Island and extreme north like that is that the shells grow green on the outside. One of the ways you can tell a Prince Edward Island oyster. I don't like that.
Look at the aftertaste, though.
You said that.
Look at the aftertaste.
It's just sort of like...
Nice
no,
sea flavor to it.
That's not a sea flavor. You know what that tastes like. You've used that term before.
Poopy diaper?
Well, this looks promising to me.
But see...
Notice how deep that shell is.
Yes, I see. You like the size. But also, do you see there's fat on this? You see that shred of fat right there? There's fat. It's...
Ooh, this is going to be a good one.
This might be our compromise oyster. I like this very much.
That's awesome. Now this...
California
Kumamoto, which are usually much smaller.
Don't like it, particularly. Too creamy, and not enough salt.
I'd have this in bed with the right company.
That wouldn't be me. Let's point out right away.
You got the wrong shape.
John, here we go, Alaska. You want the juicy one or the non-juicy one?
You like the juice.
I
like the oyster.
Okay, let's go for it. Look at that. And sometimes when you turn...
I envied the size on that one.
Yes, but when you cut a shell, the adductor muscle, and turn the oyster open, it's a magic trick. More juice appears somehow.
That's like butter. That is just, that is bliss. I loved everything but the aftertaste on that one.
The aftertaste was the only part I loved. But that's it, John. I mean, it's clear that we come from two different sides of the ocean. You like the American style, and I like the French style, and that's all there is to it. You know?
Question. Did you enjoy the oysters for all of your bitching and moaning in this thing? And me too. There's such a, you know what it is? There's a mystery. I have no, it's not like chicken or anything, or even lobster or anything, which I can enjoy, but there's no mystery. There's always a total mystery with oysters.
It's absolutely true.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I wouldn't pay this if I were you, David. Come on.
How to sear mushrooms. Thyme, butter, shallot, mushrooms, salt, oil, pepper. First, clean your mushrooms with a towel, not by dunking them underwater. That washes all the flavor out of the mushrooms. Now slice them up. Put your pan on high heat. When it's hot, add the oil and then a small amount of the mushrooms. If you add a whole bunch at one time, all the water comes out of the mushrooms and they steam. They don't fry. This means they get soggy and pale instead of crisp and golden. Once the mushrooms show a little sear, add a little bit of the butter and then the shallot and the thyme. Once this is cooked for a minute or so, season with salt and pepper. Remember that salt always draws out moisture, so it's important to add it to your mushrooms at the end. Now take them out of the pan and get on to the next batch.
My second big tasting, I was really excited for. I really wanted this job. The restaurant's very hospitable. They put me in this great hotel and they invite me for dinner, and I'm in this fancy 4-star restaurant, like sort of feeling like a loser at the table by myself, but they're really nice and the food's beautiful. And as I'm eating, I'm getting more nervous going, oh my God, this food's gorgeous. How am I possibly going to cook for these people? And I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to be back in this fancy hotel by 9 o'clock. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to rest. I'm going to be back in the kitchen at 7 and start prepping my items. And the chef de cuisine comes back from an event, and I think she's the one leaving, and I'm applying for her job, and I think she was sent over to kind of check me out. Sits down at the table, and wine just keeps coming and coming and coming. Before I know it, 1 in the morning, and I'm like, oh my God, my tasting, I have to be back here in like 6 hours, and I've had so much wine, I don't know what to do. I get home at about 1:30, and get back to the kitchen, and I am like feeling just so tired. I'm like, I'm never gonna make it through this. Chef comes in, very poker faced, gives me no vibe. I was doing 5 or 6 courses. Each course I'm bringing them over and he's getting more and more poker faced, and I think I'm just failing. I'm like, I'm done. I shouldn't even serve the next course. Next course, more and more poker face, thank you. No reaction. I'm like, all right, I'm done. I'm cleaning up, whatever. And then talked to the chef for 3 hours when I was done and got the job. So maybe you should drink the night before your tastings.
Hey, I'm David Rosengarten. I did the very first show on the Food Network, and then 2,500 after that. But that was then, and this is now. Come join me on my culinary adventures from my home in New York to other exotic and not so exotic locales for Dave in the Life. See ya. Dear David, please find and close the 3 Alridge wines we've been discussing via email. The Wise Old Owl wines. Oh, right, these are some older winemakers who decided to, here's the pitch. John Tracy of Owl Ridge Winery is no slacker. He's an MIT-educated physicist, blah, blah, blah. Mike Brigden began his career at Woodstock almost 40 years ago. Over the decades, he managed Van Morrison, Leonard Skinner, and Eddie Money, and toured with Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones. Tom Passalacqua is a third-generation grape farmer. No young bucks these. They've all got white hair or almost no hair and are not hot, new, or hip. Well, with the exception of Mike Brigden, who's pretty groovy. Look, they're taking the real familiar style to PR here. But they're all three smart and experienced, and not one of them is anywhere near ready to don house slippers or hit the rocking chair. The Brigden Vineyard, the first red is $48 a bottle. The second red is, ooh, the Brigden's more expensive. The second red is $42 a bottle, the one that's Dry Creek Valley. And alcohol on the Dry Creek Valley is 14.7, and on the Brigden is 14.4. I say let's taste the Brigden first. If I have a choice, I'll usually taste the one with lower alcohol before the one with higher alcohol. Do you all have feelings about California Cabernet in general?
They're usually too strong for me, I feel like. I like the more European wines better.
It's like you're speaking with my words with your voice, definitely. That's exactly how I feel. They needed convincing, and it seems to me that the one thing that Americans could see typically was like, show me oak, show me tannin, show me alcohol, then I know what I'm paying for. Whereas in Europe, where they're generally more comfortable with wine, they look for things like subtlety and elegance and grace and harmony. So I think it's going to change in America ultimately, but for now, that's the prevailing opinion. It's not, horribly dark. Sometimes these big alcoholic California wines are, like almost like black purple. This one is not. It's a little bit more like garnet, and also garnet. Also, always good to look at wine with a white background like this. If you have a white sheet of paper, you'll see it much better. And it's good to tilt it like this. And the reason is that you can see what's called the meniscus, the edge of it, which is a different color you observe than the rest of it. And one of the things you want to see in the meniscus is how much is it lightening at the meniscus. It's going to be lighter at the meniscus, but how much? Sometimes when a wine is just starting to age, it starts to get lighter, more of a separation between the edge and the dark part. And that's one of the clues that a wine is aging, when it lightens up at the meniscus. Well, it's kind of a pretty nose. Kind of classic California, very forward fruit. It's not a lot of subtlety about it, maybe.
I smelled a lot of oak at first.
Yeah, I think it's oaky too. Fruit is usually the least interesting part of wine. If you want fruit, I say drink grape juice. It's amazing things that wine does other than deliver fruit. The way it looks in my glass right now, I've got a little bit more darkness and a little more advanced age maybe in the one on the left. Mm-hmm. Do you think so? The one on the right looks a little brighter, perhaps. Don't know what accounts for that, but generally speaking, red wine begins life as dark and purple, and as it ages, it gets lighter. That's one change. The other change is the change in hue. As it ages, it gets browner. It goes from purple to garnet to brick, ultimately to brown. I have not smelled them together. It's kind of a ripe fruit smell with some oak. The one on the right, to me, has a little more, one of the classic descriptors of Cabernet is like sort of green and vegetal and herbs and that whole thing. Do you think? Do you see a little bit more of that on the right? Mm-hmm. I do too. Now, so the one on the left is more of like a ripe fruit bomb kind of thing with a lot of oak thrown on it. This guy in California once explained to me that he needs really ripe fruit to use a lot of oak. And here's the way he put it in perfect California speak. He said, yeah, we like to get really killer grapes in here so we can really slap the boards on them. Which I thought was perfect. So they really slapped the boards on this one, which was obviously, I can tell right away, riper in the vineyard than this one was. When Cabernet is riper, it moves away from that green veggie thing, and it moves more into that, blackberry, porty kind of thing. So I think the one on the right was less ripe grapes and probably less wood, but I'm not sure yet. All right, I'm going to taste, you know what, now that we set it up this way, it looks to me like the one on the right, the one on the left may be heavier. So let's taste the one on the right first. I like it. That's not bad at all. It's got lots of bright acidity, and that makes your mouth water, and flavors are rather elegant. And wow, this winery, this is amazing for me. A Chardonnay I liked and a Cabernet I liked. Let's try the one on the left.
Yeah. The one on the left is definitely tougher, heavier, more tannic.
Chewy.
What?
Chewy.
Chewier, definitely. And that's a word that would be used, definitely. The one on the left was more expensive, right?
By $6.
Yeah. And that's so typical. It's like, let's get the one that's really full of oak and tannin and charge the hell out of it, and then the one that's more delicate. This is why very often when I buy California Cabernet, there's the reserve for $46 and the regular for $22. I often prefer the regular.